Please welcome Michi Hoffmann.
Goedemiddag, Amsterdam. Thank you very much for once again having me. Today we will dive down into the mythical world of PHP extensions. Before we get started, we will do a small giveaway. So we will handing out 3 century-themed PHP elephants. To win, you need to be present at the at the conference. And when you ask a question on Twitter, please tag @getcentury, and whichever questions Kaneko chooses, each person will win 1 elephant. All right, so yeah, PHP extensions. I will try to give you a rough overview about anything you will need to get started. It's quite a complex topic, so let's see how this goes. My name is Michi. I'm a software engineer working at Century in our Vienna office. When I'm not coding, I mostly spend my time walking around various cities, taking photos. And yeah, I'm generally also super into everything, aviation, flight simulation, you name it, I probably play it or simulate it. Yeah, I also pretty much into fingerboarding, so like tiny skateboards, you do tricks with your fingers. And I also like to combine my hobbies. So I really enjoy taking photos of people fingerboarding. So that are a few of my photos from a few friends from Vienna. And I also like to take videos of people fingerboarding. So please enjoy this 20-second clip, which I always wanted to play on the big stage or on the big screen. Yeah, and if you want to see this in person, find me at the after-show party. All right. Thank you. As engineers, we tend to use the word magic quite often, right? Like if something works in a way we don't fully understand, it's magic. And when I first started using PHP, everything was magic. Like I started to use a framework and I had no clue what it was doing, so it was magic. But at one point I was like, maybe I could just look at the source code of the framework, because, surprise, it's actually written in PHP. Yeah, and that helped me really understand how things work, and it became less magical. And another thing I always considered, or still do, magic is the send engine, so the compiler and the runtime environment PHP is running on. But for quite a while, I always had like the desire to dive a little bit deeper into it. Like, how does PHP actually work internally? But how do you approach such a topic? When we develop software, we sometimes use an approach called test-driven development. So we write some tests, and then we brute force our implementation to the point where our tests pass. And then hopefully it's correct. Test-driven development wouldn't have really worked to get a close understanding of how PHP extensions work. So we needed a new technique, and it's called CDD. So what does CDD stand for? It's called conference-driven development. So it works like this. You find a topic you are super interested in, but you either lack the motivation, the time, or any other reason to actually do it. And ideally, it's also like a topic your company could benefit from. Then you apply at a conference with a talk about the topic you want to invest time in. And if they accept the talk, congratulations, you just created an enormous amount of pressure on yourself to actually make this thing happen you want to talk about. Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. Hi. Yeah, I always wanted to create a PHP extension. And fortunately enough, Sentry also has some sort of interest to have a PHP extension. We actually already use one today for our profiling offering. It's not written by us, it's written by Wikipedia, called Xzymer. It's a sampling profiler. Yeah, and my manager was on board with that, so I started hacking. It's quite hard to get started at this topic because there's very little documentation out there. Oftentimes it's really old, like from the PHP 5, PHP 7 days. But fortunately enough, most PHP extensions that are also used in the core, they're open source. So you can at least look at the source code. And of course, PHP itself, the source code is open source. So that really helps. So what are PHP extensions? I think that gives us a rough overview of what to expect. But there are actually different types of extensions. There are so-called Zend extensions, and there are so-called modules. So for example, in your PHP INI, if you use something like opcache, you would load it or enable it with Zend extension. And then there is also the other extension, like curl. So what's the difference? Well, the Zend extensions, they hook much, much deeper into the virtual machine itself. You can do all sorts of crazy things, but that's not today's topic. So today we will focus on PHP modules, and I will continue using the term PHP extensions. The reason why I also mentioned modules is that in the Zend API, like in the Zend engine, let's say, these extensions like curl are referenced as modules. But for the sake of simplicity, we will stay with extensions for today. Good, so PHP extensions. I think there are like 3-ish different types of why you would actually care to create an extension. You want to make something fast, you want to make something reusable, or you actually want to make something possible. So what does this mean? Well, to make something fast, C is surprisingly a lot faster than PHP. So anytime you have some critical business logic that needs to run really, really fast, it's a good idea to maybe put this into an extension. Examples are the JSON extension or the YAML extension. Though keep in mind, creating a complex extension is complex. So you should really have a good understanding if this is like the best spend of your time, because sometimes throwing a little bit more resources onto a problem also fixes it. The next type is to make something reusable. Write it once, use it often, right? So for example, curl. Curl is already in existence, it's written in C. So how cool would it be that you just take your C code, expose it as userland functions you actually can call in PHP, and then you're done. And that's exactly what the curl extension does, right? At a former company of mine, we had a shared C++ code base, and we used this inside our iOS and Android apps. And because some functionality we also wanted to have on the web, we created a PHP extension, so we could call this code also on the web. And the last type is to actually make something possible, right? Like there are definitely a few things you can't do in PHP. One of them is like create like a profiler. And for that, it's like the only way to actually enable certain functionality. So you kind of forced to use a PHP extension. Or you do some hacky stuff, right? Like you can literally modify the abstract syntax tree of PHP at runtime. So this opens another can of worms. So how do we get started to actually create a PHP extension? If we want to use someone else's extension, we can install it. For example, via Packle, which is the PHP extension community library. Maybe you've used it in the past. Packle install, extension name, gets downloaded, installed. You have to activate it, you're good to go. Similar spirit, but the new kid on the block is something called Pi, which is the PHP installer for extensions. So that's actually pretty new. So I think the first release came out in October last year. That's, I think, mainly driven by the PHP Foundation. And it kind of integrates with packages, which I think is a really good thing because now we have extensions and libraries at the same place. If you have more questions about this, I think Roman or Sebastian will be really happy to talk about this. And the third option is you can build an extension from source. So you download the source code, build it, and then you run it. And that's what we want to focus today. What do we need? Well, we need a C compiler. I mostly do development work on macOS, so when you have Xcode installed, you already get a compiler called Clang. You need a bunch of other libraries. I actually don't know what most of them do very precisely, but you need them. You can just brute force, you run the script as long as it stops complaining and just brew install anything that might be missing. And lastly, preferably, you should have a debug build of PHP. So not like a production version of PHP you normally run in the servers, or for example, when you use herd locally, you kind of want to have a debug build. A nice side effect of extensions is that, hey, you're a PHP developer, normally you just press F5 in your browser and everything works, but now you're introducing compile time. So that's really cool because you will have some more downtime to slack around. Yeah, so we need to build PHP. Just clone the source code, check out a release branch you're interested in. Normally you would choose something like a little bit older, let's say maybe 8.2, 8.1, depending on which versions your extension should support. Then you run buildconf. And buildconf creates the configure script and also moves around some header files. We don't worry about this too much because once we build PHP once, we don't care anymore. Next, you configure your PHP build. In my case, I'm setting like which directories my ini files are located and where the final binaries should end up. And then you compile it. So computer goes room. That might take a while. And once you call make install, the binaries end up on your hard drive. Amazing. So now you kind of probably want to use the PHP version you just compiled. So a good idea is to add it to your path. Once again, if you use herd, you sadly have to uncomment all the binaries herd injected, but you can bring them back later. Yeah, and then when we run PHP -version, we now have our dev build of PHP running on our system. Next, we need to generate our extension. When you cloned the PHP repository, there's a handy script that will help you scaffold or bootstrap your extension skeleton. So you run it, and then it will tell you like how to actually build the extension later, and thank you for using PHP. So let's look what is generated when you bootstrap your extension skeleton. So that's the files you will end up with. You will have a header file, which by convention is called PHP underscore the name of your extension. And here we will later add our function definitions. There's also like a version in there you could add a name. Then you have a C file. And that's basically where you write most of your business logic in. I mean, you can, of course, later on, if your code grows, you can add more. But that's basically the main point where you will write all your business logic. Then we have the so-called stub files. So this is basically what your extensions will expose to your users or like to the user land of PHP. So something that people then later on can actually call. If you do it like this, it's actually pretty handy because there's a small make script included that will then later on generate you the arc info headers you will need. We will look into this in a bit more detail later on. And then you also got some tests. Once again, we will also look at them. It's probably not something you're super familiar with by the looks of it, but it's actually Pretty cool. Next, we need to know a few things about the PHP lifecycle in order to write an extension. Once your PHP process starts, certain hooks are called. A PHP process either starts, for example, if you call a script on the CLI, that starts a PHP process. If you spawn an FPM worker, this spawns a PHP process. And when this happens, there are certain hooks called, and one of them is minit. And in minit, you would basically do anything you need for the entire runtime of your application. So for example, in minit, you could define certain PHP ini settings, right? Like if the extension you're building exposes some options to the user, you would define them in there. You don't really know how long minit, like what you do there, will live because like FPM reuses its workers, right? So you get like 1 to n requests there. That's something to keep in mind. Yeah, and the next hook that's quite interesting is the one calledrinit, and this is called every time a new request comes in. And then we also have all the shutdown functions, and we use them to clean up behind ourselves, right? It's quite easy to leak memory in there, and if you do this for long enough, everything will crash, and then everyone is sad. Next, we need to know about Zend values or Z-vals. PHP is a dynamic programming language. C is not. C is statically compiled or statically typed. So we need some way to take some random PHP variable that could change its types in a blink of an eye and put this into something that actually compiles in C. And for that, we use so-called C-vals. And most types in PHP have a corresponding C-val, and that's what you will use internally to handle whatever arguments your user passes into your extension or when you return it from there. I will quickly talk about memory management. This is probably a topic you can talk for hours. Just be careful. If you leak 1 byte every time on each request, this will crash every server in a matter of minutes when you have enough traffic or even quicker. There are some tools like Valgrind, which is like a memory profiler, and it has some built-in leak detection. So all of these things, just use all of them. It's really hard to get this right. The Zend engine has some safety guards built into it. So if you just follow what others do, then it should be good. Cool. Good. And lastly, of course, you have to build your extension. I mean, again, this is pretty similar to how we just built our PHP build. We run PHP eyes, or however this is pronounced, I sadly don't know. We run the configure script, we compile it, and then we install it. Cool. Let's look at some code. All right. There we are. Cool. So we ran our generation script to bootstrap or scaffold our extension, and that's the files we get. Maybe we should quickly talk about what we're actually building. So as I'm really into everything aviation, I thought, let's build a small helper method, right? An aircraft always needs to know how high it is, and that, of course, changes depending on the air pressure. And different countries use different systems. So in the US, it's quite common to use altimeter, and that's measured in inches of mercury. And in the EU and other parts of the world, we use something we call the QNH, and this is measured in hectopascal. So let's write an extension that exposes 2 methods to the userland, one to convert an altimeter to QNH, and vice versa. So first, let's take a look at the step file. What would we do here? Well, we have our QNH to altimeter function, and we have our altimeter to QNH function. This one accepts an integer, returns a float. The other one accepts a float and returns an integer. When you write an extension, you generate a module entry. In there, you have a name, and you have a function vector. And then you have like all the hooks we previously discussed. You can define them here, and then they would be called. All right, so now we have the PHP code. And now, if we run a certain make script, we can actually generate an arc info header file. Good. So let's look at this a little bit. So again, we have a dynamic language, and we somehow need to make it work statically compiled. So the Send engine exposes a lot of macros to help us achieve this. So when we look at the first one, we basically tell, hey, this function will return a double, so a float. And the first argument is an integer. We do the reverse for the other function. So we will return an integer, but expect a float. Then we create our function vector. And all of that is generated just by us writing this few lines of PHP. And then we can use the function vector in here. Cool. So now let's actually write our first function. So again, let's start with QNH2 ultimatum. So the way you would do this is like this. So you use the PHP function macro, and then you pass in the function name. In here, we create a variable, and now we need to parse the parameter. So once again, we're using a macro, and this will then convert our like the value that the user passed in will be then converted to a long. And then we use, once again, another macro to return the result. And now we're actually calling some C code. Yeah, I call it PHP underscore. I saw this somewhere else. I'm not sure why people do this, but why not? Yeah, and here's actually our logic. So we take the QNH, divide it by some number, round it to get the output. And for our other function, we do the reverse. Cool, good. So the code is written. Let's look at the tests. And the way you test such functions is actually pretty straightforward. So you create a PHP file, and it has various sections. The first one is the name of the test, and then actually some PHP code. So here we call my function, pass in our integer, and then we expect some certain output because we're calling var dump. And then we have to test in reverse for the other function. Cool. So let's take a look if this actually works. So first of all, we call PHP files, then configure. It will do some things. And now when we take a look in our code base, you see like a lot of new stuff has appeared. Also a makefile, which is quite handy. So let's first see if our extension actually compiles. We can just call make. Build complete. Cool. So let's run the tests I just showed you. Was it just make test? Yes. And we can see they pass. Awesome. Good. OK. But now it would actually be cool to be able to call this in our PHP code. To do that, we call make install. And this now puts the shared object file, like the extension SO file, in my configured path. And now it's running there. So let's try to call ultimate QNH. So we pass in 2992, and we expect it to return 1013. Yay. And now we can also try the reverse, of course, the other function we added. And it returns 29991. And with that, thank you. OK. Someone should now enter the stage, I thought. Oh, God. He disappeared.
Hello, sorry. Backstage stuff, sorry. What did I miss?
That was amazing.
Oh, a big applause. So, I got questions.
Oh, God.
So, Eurodev is asking, would it be possible to write PHP extensions in other languages than C?
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
example,
Oh, sorry.
for example, Rust or Go?
Yes. Now, you can do this. Basically, every function that can create bindings towards C you can use. So you can write C code with Go, you can write with Rust. But yeah, that's definitely a way. It's possible, yeah.
Is it a good idea?
I mean, absolutely, at one point, sure. I would not recommend starting with it. Like, I wouldn't add abstractions before you kind of master the basics kind of dish. But later on, sure. I mean, there are some companies where I saw like they have a profile written in Rust, and they expose it in their PHP extension, so yeah.
Okay, sounds cool. And where's the other one? Tiago is asking, have you considered building a package based on your learnings that could be used to create an extension in an easier way?
So there are already some projects that do that. So there is some C++ library, I forgot the name sadly, that kind of abstracts this whole thing away. I haven't used it. Right now, I don't think I'm at the point yet where I can create extensions to create extensions or so. I think this will require some more deep dives at night.
Interesting. And finally, for the third one, Abinadi, hopefully I don't mess up his name, is asking, what is the best resource to use when you want to learn how to build PHP extensions?
Yeah, so the one resource I use the most, which I think is actually quite good, is something called the PHP internals book. You can just Google it, it's like a website. There's tons of stuff in there. There's also a lot of stuff missing. Yeah, as I mentioned before, give this a read and then just dive into other extensions to learn how it works.
So there's no extension cast for...
Sadly not, no. There's no Udemy 20 hours from zero to hero extension course.
Maybe not yet.
Maybe not yet.
Not yet. Okay, but thank you all. Thank you again for the amazing talk. Please applause for Michi.
Thank you very much.